Hello everyone, welcome to Abnormal Investigations. It's good to see everybody. We've got a Wendigo encounter today that a guy talks about, and he says he for sure encountered one, and he's 100% sure that they do exist, so let's get into his encounter and see what he encountered. In July of 2020, I was 18 years old. My family and I lived in a small house just outside of town in the foothills of North Carolina. While we weren't deep in the wilderness, we might as well have been. Our house sat on the edge of a dense forest, surrounded by trees that stretched far into the mountains. From our front porch, you could just barely see the town 5 minutes away. Occasionally, we could hear the distant hum of traffic or the barking of the neighbor's dog. But for the most part, the stillness of the surrounding woods gave everything an eerie sense of isolation. We kept a few animals, chickens, goats, and a couple of cows. And the rhythms of rural life kept us busy. Most nights were peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes the world feel safe. But that night I'll never forget. It was anything but peaceful. The temperature had dropped unexpectedly that evening. There was a front that had moved in. In the midst of July, when it should have been sweltering, the air turned a frigid. It was 30 degrees Fahrenheit, too cold for this time of year, especially in the south. The chill in the air was unnatural, a sharp bite that made my skin pickle. As I felt the night air itself, somehow, it felt cold, and I felt like there was something wrong. This was the wrong kind of cold. It was the evil kind of cold. It's hard to explain. I was sitting in the living room, idly scrolling through my phone, when I realized I'd left my phone charger in the car. I debated going out for a second, but the thought of stepping out into the unnatural cold did nag at me. Finally, I stood up and headed to the door. I couldn't be without my phone, now could I? When I stepped outside, the frigid air hit me immediately. My breath misted in front of me, but it wasn't the typical summer night coolness. It was bone-chilling, the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones that doesn't let go. Again, this is hard for me to explain. The silence around me was absolute. No crickets, no rustling of leaves, no distant sounds of town life, nothing, just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes you feel almost like you're being watched. As I walked down the porch and toward the car, something shattered the silence. It sounded like a herd of goats, panicked, frantic, bleats that didn't sound right. They weren't the usual calls of hunger or curiosity. These were different, sharp, desperate cries that echoed into the night. It was a kind of noise that makes your blood run cold, sending a shiver all over your body. I froze, listening to something that just wasn't right. The goats sounded terrified, like they were running from something. Mom called out, my voice cutting through the quiet. "The goats are freaked out, Mom." I quietly ran up to the second floor, my heart beginning to race. The second I got to the window, the more the panic and their voices rang in my ears. I didn't wait for a response. My stomach was already turning in knots. I grabbed my AR rifle. It was a weapon that I was trained with, but tonight it felt all different. I felt like the weight of it was nothing compared to the weight of whatever was out there. My hands trembled as I checked the magazine, chambered around, and clicked off the safety. Something about the air felt wrong, heavy, and I was afraid, but there wasn't nothing going to kill my goats. I stepped back outside, my boots crunching on the gravel, and immediately the cold hit me again. The night seemed unnaturally dark, like it was holding its breath. It was so weird. As I jogged toward the goat pen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something beyond the goat's fear. When I got out there, I knew I wasn't alone. When I reached the pen, I stood for a moment, scanning the area. The goats were huddled together, wide-eyed and shivering. But it wasn't just fear, it was panic. Their eyes were darting around as if they saw something that I couldn't. I counted them to make sure they were all there, but that didn't make the dread in my stomach go away. The pen seemed too quiet now, and the sheep, oppressed silence surrounded me. I walked the perimeter of the pen, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, looking for any kind of thing. My boots crunched softly against the gravel as I checked for anything that might have spoken, or even spooked them. The distant sound of a dog barking in the neighborhood A dog I've heard countless times before seemed far away, like the world was just out of reach. The beam of my light swept across the yard, catching nothing but shadows of trees and the occasional flicker of movement. But then, at the far end of the pen, I saw something. It wasn't an animal. It was something very worse. At first, it was just a vague shape crouched low near the fence. I thought it was a deer, maybe a wild animal, but as the beam of light hit it, my breath caught. It was a figure, and it wasn't human, not entirely. It was unnaturally thin, its limbs stretched out at odd angles. Its skin was pale, almost ghostly, and it stretched too tightly over its bones. Its skin was so tight, I could see the outline of this thing's ribs. It was crouched low to the ground, its back arched in a way that made my skin crawl. But its face was the worst part. There was a face, or I guess where the face should be, there was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin stretched across a blank face where its features should have been. No nose, no mouth, just smooth, deathly skin. The eyes were the color of milky, empty clouds, pale and unseeing, but not. They looked wrong, like a dead animal's. I was paralyzed by fear. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands were shaking violently, but I steadied the barrel. I reached for the safety. The second my finger touched the lever, the thing moved. Not walked, not ran, it vanished. Just like that. One moment it was there, crouched, watching, and the next moment it was just gone. There was no sound, no movement. It was like it just dissolved into the night air. The shock hit me like a wave. I couldn't comprehend it. My legs finally moved, and I didn't think. I just ran. My boots pounded the gravel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door behind me. My mother was in the living room, staring at me with worried eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice. I couldn't answer her. I couldn't tell her what I had just seen. "Everything's fine," I said, "Mom. Must have just been some coyotes out around the pen. It had the goats all worked up." So I went to bed. And I think she knew that I saw something more that night, but I never told her any more about it, and it never came back. Do you think it came to eat my sheep, or do you think it was just messing around? It sounds familiar. If you're having more trouble, I would say that it's not there to kill your sheep. If you haven't been missing any sheep, it's probably prowling around and you caught it out there, maybe eating sheep feed. But I would say if you haven't lost any sheep in the past, it's not there for the sheep. So just keep your eyes open. Do like we've talked about, lights, perimeter cameras, things of that nature should help push it back and get it away, I think. I hope that'll work for you. Thank you for listening, guys. Keep your head on a swivel. Don't be something's dinner. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening.